Hey folks, welcome back to the Change Physician Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Kevin, and I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Melissa Cady, and our guest for today is Dr. Austin Chiang. And Dr. Austin Chiang is a gastroenterologist with multiple subspecialties doing some pretty incredible things in the healthcare system. But what we're going to talk about is how he has sort of harnessed social media in this new world and kind of paired that with clinical practice and creating his Change Physician lifestyle. So Austin, great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
And let's go back to the beginning. So when we're talking about your journey here, why is it that you decided to go into medicine in the first place?
I thought it was a good combination of my personality and my interest in science and the human body. And that's really how it came together. There are a couple of physicians in my family. I have two cousins who are physicians, one who is an ophthalmologist, one who's a plastic surgeon. My grandfather was a surgeon as well in the World War II era. So I had a little bit of exposure, but I think at the end of the day, it was really just a personality and interest thing.
Yeah. Okay. And that interest in that persists through medical school, or did you find any, or I mean, I guess there's people who just like sail through medical school and say, this is perfectly aligned. And that's always kind of interesting to me. When there are people that said, you know what, when I get in the middle of medicine, there's something going on here that I may not be sure about. So where were you in that process?
Ooh, I mean, I think that I am the type of person who has a lot of interests. So, I definitely felt like as a career, medicine was still the right path for me, but I didn't want to give up on a lot of my other interests. And there certainly are things in medicine that I'd like to see improved upon and that aren't perfect, that we often complain about. And I think that's sort of what drove me in some ways to, try to carve out a different niche in certain areas for myself.
Yeah. And so I noticed you have a master's in public health. Where did that come into your medical training?
Yeah, it's a little bit atypical because I did my master's during my fellowship.
Oh.
And I went to a very research-heavy program that sort of gave us the time and resources to be able to pursue that. And yeah, so I think the original intention, honestly, was more of like a research-focused master's, but I was also very much interested in population health and, health communications and policy. So it ended up being a little bit of everything.
Gotcha. And you talked about those interests or hobbies you didn't want to let go of. What were those things?
I mean, some of them are totally unrelated, like just music and art and, things that some people really see as a career for themselves, but for me, they just remain interests. And other things like social media, I got into social media. I grew up in this generation that has always, in some ways, been exposed to social media and have always enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. And in the beginning, it was definitely more of a personal use, just for fun thing. And then I as time went by, I really wanted to see how I could incorporate it more professionally, especially because time is limited. And, if I wanted to bring my interests together with medicine, this was a great way to do that.
Yeah. So so you did the internal medicine residency, a gastroenterology specialty training, and in addition to that, obesity medicine. Correct? I
did, yeah. I'm boarded in obesity medicine, but I did a year of bariatric endoscopy fellowship during my gastroenterology fellowship as well. And then I did another year after that of advanced endoscopy fellowship.
Gotcha.
So sort of, 3 fellowships at the end of the day.
Super specialized. So during all of that training, did you find a conflict and be able to do the things you love to do?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes I felt like I was being stretched kind of thin. Yeah. And, but in other ways, it kind of all goes hand in hand. Bariatric endoscopy and obesity medicine is becoming a bigger field within gastroenterology, and with new devices and technologies coming about, that the training that I had in advanced endoscopy really supplements that. So it all kind of comes together.
Yeah.
I want to kind of touch on 2 things, but the first one is you mentioned you never wanted to lose track of your hobbies.
Yeah.
I think that's very, very common for people to have a lot of hobbies and they enter medical school and then and for sure when you start residency, but then you lose them. So how did you maintain that, or did you carve out time, dedicated time for them, or? And I'm just speaking to someone who lost all their hobbies when they were married. I want to know how you did it. How did you keep this stuff?
I think that part of me is definitely someone who really is stubborn and not wanting to give up some of those things. But on the other hand, when I was in medical school and residency, I was in New York City. So those sorts of opportunities were everywhere, and I could walk out the door and find some way to pursue hobbies that way. And in some ways, it was also the program that I was attending, like medical school, really introduced, I think maybe a new concept at the time, but they had us taking certain classes that were non-medical to try to, I guess, reintroduce some humanity into what we do. And so, for instance, I was at Columbia for medical school, and they had us for an entire semester, 1 day a week, going to do something, focused in this area. So for me, it was going to the Metropolitan Museum once a week and sketching and learning about the art. And this was a group of us, and some of us did this, some of us took yoga classes, some of us took photography, and this was a required class. So, which I thought was really interesting, and I thought, what a way to capitalize on the city, because, yeah, I mean, what's the point of living in New York if you can't do those sorts of things?
That makes me jealous, because that sounds fantastic, and it makes a lot of actually sense from a medical school perspective. If you're looking at how do you engage your students, how do you provide them some time for creative outlet, because we're knowing about those associations with learning now. So really, really forward thinking. Yeah. But let's then move into the social media aspect, because I'm really glad that you mentioned it, is that you're sort of smack dab in the middle of this generation. Really, I mean, obviously the first generation that has been in this, like you don't really have a memory of when it wasn't like this, the way it is. And so I'd like to kind of hear your perspectives on where did you find some conflict from say maybe the physician groups, the societies, et cetera, who may view this as a very threatening media, and then how then did you sort of say, well, no, this isn't scary, this is something that we should be embracing as physicians? How did you kind of pull that together?
I think for me, I sort of saw the fact that social media wasn't going anywhere. And I mean, even social media as we see it today isn't going to be the same as it will be in a couple of years, but the idea of it isn't going to go away. And I guess, maybe that's the benefit of having grown up in this generation, in a sense that I've seen some platforms come and go, your Friendsters and MySpaces and, other platforms like that. And that there's going to always be the next iteration of it, but I think people are always going to, try to connect. And I think that that's what all of these platforms share in common. And so, yeah, when it came to, how I sort of incorporated it into like my professional life and identity, that really was certain things I would never have anticipated being where I am today in terms of, from a social media perspective. So I kind of had to just see how things unfolded over time.
So are there particular, the one thing I really liked is that one of your I just got an account on TikTok, by the way. I still have some, and it was only because somebody else that does TikTok that we had as a guest. And I'm like, I love to dance and I need to reincorporate my little fun stuff. And I love to teach. So you talked about teaching can be fun. Kind of what's your take on like the limitations of what you can do as a professional on your own personal account, or have your own business account or whatnot? What are those limitations or basic rules?
I mean, it's interesting because if we go back and look at some of the older quote unquote guidelines out there about health professional, especially physician social media use, they used to say to separate your professional identity from your personal one. And from the get-go, I never agreed with that. And I have one of my role models, I think, to credit for that way of thinking, because part of towards the beginning of this entire journey, I'd spent some time at ABC News as part of the medical unit there. And what drove that interest was really understanding how the general public gets their medical information from mainstream media. And Dr. Richard Besser, who was the chief editor, medical editor for ABC News at the time, he would periodically post on social media, and he would post things that were personal, even though he was a public figure in some ways and, kind of expected to talk about more serious things, but he would talk about the fact that he was on a bike ride or things that, I think showcased his interests. And that's when I felt that, why hide that? People want to get to know us as people, and we're already kind of distrusted in some ways as a medical profession, and we are seen as robotic and unapproachable. So yeah, I really wanted to just bring the two together. So even before TikTok, this is what I was doing years ago on Twitter, and then later on Instagram. And, again, like on the theme of newer social media platforms coming out, TikTok was just the next natural progression.
Yeah. So are there certain, do you feel like anything is, possible as far as what you talk about? I haven't gotten through every single post that you've done, but do you feel like anything's possible for me to post, or do you kind of have certain things that you just kind of like stick to?
Yeah. I think that when I develop an audience, I recognize that people follow me for a reason. Mm-hmm. And I'm always on the lookout for like what that reason is and who exactly my audience is. And I know that, from the beginning, it might be difficult because your intended audience might not be who your content is actually being shown to or who it gets to. And like, for instance, I'd say, or where the platform is going. So for instance, I think Twitter has really become where a lot of the academic medical community has congregated. And so my content has really somewhat shifted there. And also, I mean, in recent months, a lot of advocacy happens on that platform as well. On Instagram, I think my intended audience from the beginning was more of the general public, mm-hmm. because that's really my hope, is to reach, your next door neighbor who doesn't know much about medicine, but, you want to help influence. And then I found out that really a lot of my audience there really wasn't a whole lot of the general public, but actually other medical professionals or aspiring doctors. And so I kind of had to play off of that a little bit. And so in doing so, for each platform, identifying who my audience was, I would kind of decide what was most appropriate to put on there. And of course, there are a lot of different kind of professionalism concerns and patient privacy concerns and things that I kind of self-censor, mm-hmm. so that I don't run into problems. And some of these things we, I guess, as a social media medical community have learned the hard way, and we've shared a lot of experiences with each other, which is part of the reason why many of us who've had a lot of experience and have been able to sort of build a community on social media came together and formed this association for healthcare social media.
Yeah. Can you elaborate a little bit about that so people understand who it's serving and what it does?
Yeah. So, I think it might be helpful to give a little context of how it started. About a year and a half ago, a little more than a year and a half ago, we started seeing a concerning trend on Instagram in particular, because I think unlike Twitter, Instagram had introduced this whole idea of influencers, and we see that with fashion influencers and fitness influencers and other non-medical influencers. But we started seeing that this trend was picking up among medical professionals as well, where people were sort of identifying spokespeople, so to speak, for medicine. And some people were using their voices in the right way, but others were also capitalizing on this in ways that I thought was inappropriate, and people were sort of misrepresenting themselves. And so we wanted to run up a campaign on Instagram called Verify Healthcare, where we encourage people to disclose their credentials and encourage their followers to also look up who they follow, just to make sure that they know who to trust online. And from there, we kind of started discussing all the different issues about healthcare and social media. And we went the route of forming this nonprofit professional society, because we felt that in the future, we really need a professional society to guide us and to really legitimize the space as well. You know, a lot of us spend a lot of time on social media, and it's not something that's incentivized or rewarded in the academic community, even though we're expected to speak to our communities, speak to the general public. And that's one of the biggest disconnects, is I felt that, you know, here we are expecting our thought leaders to somehow reach the general public, and but at the same time, there's no instruction or no guidance, and no incentive for people to do that. Yeah. And those of us who have been able to do that over the years, I think, felt the need to, you know, help others out. You know, by definition, I think we put ourselves out there because we want to be accessible and want to help others out. And it's not only about the lessons we've learned about responsible use, but also in how we've been able to effectively grow our social media presences. Because there is a bit of a strategy involved, and collaborations, and a lot of thought that goes into it. So, and this varies by platform too. And we can see day by day that these platforms are only becoming more and more complex with more and more features, and it's just ever evolving. So those of us on these platforms, we've each been able to, I think, really understand. I can't claim to be an expert on every social media platform, but I certainly know people who are experts on YouTube, or, you know, on Instagram or TikTok. So, and so that's why we figured that that this would probably be the best route to go.
Awesome.
And you brought up an important point there, though, is with the rise of social media, and I definitely agree with you. There's a lot of voices out there that are saying that they're speaking as doctors. I'm just going to use the generic term doctors, and providing health information. And it has been quite disconcerting to see what is being put forth. So, and so I applaud you on that, right? Actually, Melissa and I have talked about this many times about, like, if you see someone who says doctor what, the first question we ask is, well, doctor of what?
Yes.
And if it takes you more than a Google click to figure that out, there's probably an issue with that involved. And not to say that necessarily the information may be bad intrinsically, but really it's kind of verifying your sources on that. So, I really like how you guys have taken this idea that as physicians, we have voices. So you're sort of emphasizing, you know, it's almost another part of practice. And I don't want to say people who are feeling overwhelmed think they have to start an Instagram attack or anything like that, but it does provide another media for you to communicate with your audience and provide valuable health related information and change information for them. So I'm just could you give us an example of how you have used your social media practices in order to influence or optimize your clinical practices, or have you done that?
I've done a little bit of that. I would say that, you know, one of the reasons why I'm on social media is also for that particular reason, because a lot of what I do in bariatric endoscopy are procedures that are not highly publicized or well known by the general public, yet we know that they are effective and can help people who can use it. So, so getting the word out about that, I think, has been really helpful on various platforms. I think, you know, jumping on what a lot of organizations already do with awareness months, you know, certain cancers have their designated awareness month, and providing our perspective and expertise on that, I think, is also really helpful. So yeah, I think that, you know, these little things here and there have certainly helped my practice.
Yeah. I'm curious, you know, you talked about, you know, learn the hard way. Sometimes there's some things you shouldn't do. And then obviously, you know, learning some strategies to be effective with your communication or get the message spread, you know, farther and wider. Can you give just like a couple examples of big no-nos in the social media world, just as an example?
Yeah, I mean, even like what you mentioned about how you're representing yourself online is very important. And that's, I think, particularly relevant for trainees, and being totally transparent with who they are. I think that there are, you know, along the way, I've definitely seen many, many medical students, for instance, say that they're Dr. So-and-so, and that can lead to some issues. I think other things that, I mean, the blatant things like revealing patient identity and patient privacy, I think that we all sort of know. But even that, there are some nuances. I think a lot of people really want to help and educate, and they may describe clinical scenarios in vivid detail and inadvertently reveal patient identity, or even share radiographs and other images that might not show patients' faces, but could potentially reveal patient identity. Other pitfalls that I would talk about, I think, you know, I think that just being absolutely careful and trusting your gut feeling as to like what's appropriate and not appropriate to share. Platforms like TikTok, I think a couple months ago, there were certain medical TikTok accounts that had come under fire because, you know, I think that there's a fine line about using humor for education without mocking patients. And I think that that was like a big deal at the time. And other things like when we talk about certain sensitive subjects that we want to raise awareness about, but don't fully understand if you're a novice to social media, like what the repercussions could be. So for instance, you know, talking about like vaccine awareness and, you know, inviting a lot of, you know, comments from the anti-vaccine groups, that is a whole world in and of itself, and how to deal with some of these groups, because I've been, for instance, like baited into conversations with them privately, only to have those private messages put out there for the public and for their groups to go in on. And, you know, doxing and that sort of thing is very real and can certainly affect people's employment. And so, yeah, these are sort of the lessons that we learn along the way. And even with, you know, building a following, people I know who are, have big followings on social media have to be aware of like their personal safety and how they're, you know, like the timing of what they're posting, so that people don't necessarily, you know, so that their safety isn't compromised or their own privacy isn't compromised. So these are, yeah, sort of some examples, at least off the top of my head, that I can think about.
No, those are all great, you know, things to think about. I think, you know, you know, very polarized subjects, obviously they get heated and maybe political and all those things that can set you up. And even like, depending on which, you know, account or what type of social media, your photo, if they can just figure out the geo tag or location, or, you know, there's little things that you don't always think about from a safety standpoint. But I am curious if you have a nugget or two. You've been generous with your time already, but a nugget or two of maybe just pick a social media platform that's common. Like maybe a little nugget, just something that would help people be more effective at getting their message across. Maybe a couple nuggets.
I would say, yeah, it really depends on the platform. I think.
Yeah, say Instagram.
Yeah, so Instagram, I think for me, because my audience tends to be other medical professionals, I think that collaboration is very important. And I think that it really needs to be seen as an extension of your real life community. And I think that one of the key mistakes from the beginning that a lot of people, a misconception I think that people have, is that that posting something online, as long as it's fun and engaging, is going to do well on its own. And I think that that's not true. It's not going to, things don't go viral because they just sit there on their own. I think that it requires a coordinated effort and strategy, and that often means collaborating with other people and helping each other out and responding to your comments, and, you know, treating these, when people take the time to comment on your content, to respond and build upon those relationships. And I often say that social media has to be social, you know, it's not a one-way street. And then I think that when it comes to a more public-facing platform like TikTok or YouTube, even though I'm not huge into YouTube, I think that, you know, asking the right questions about what are people curious to know about and what is their level of understanding, and yeah, just sort of putting yourself in the shoes of your audience is really important.
Right.
Because there are a lot of complex concepts and conditions and rare diseases that I'd love to talk about. But I think that if it's just not relatable or not something that people want to know about, then it could be difficult to put that information across. So, and sometimes you can do it as long as you package it in a way that I think that is palatable, I guess, or that easily received. And I think when TikTok came along, one of the things that really helped that platform out is that people capitalize on, or I certainly do, I capitalize on the trending audios that are happening. So if they're like songs or things like that, I capitalize on what those songs are about or the sounds in those songs. And I try to, you know, turn that into something else that's more medically relevant.
Nice. And do you get to know who your audience or what they want based on just their comments, or do you use some type of analytical tool?
So almost all of these platforms have built-in analytics. So I have a general sense of, you know, who my audience is. They don't give like, you know, a whole lot of detail. Like they're not going to reveal what everyone's profession is. But for instance, I know that my audience on TikTok is predominantly female, and you know, they are mostly like 3/4 are in the US, and you know, things that probably aren't going to affect a whole lot of, you know, my content. I'm not really looking to direct my content in, you know, based on those analytics, but I certainly have learned, especially from like live streams, if I'm directly communicating with an audience through something like that, I get a sense of who actually cares and who is actually tuning in. Because on a platform like TikTok, a lot of the content comes across eyes that are not actually, you know, that interested in what I have to say. And that's a kind of blessing and a curse, because you can put valuable health information out there for people who might otherwise not care. But at the same time, you know, if they don't care, then your content might, you know, die on arrival. So it's kind of, you have to strike a tricky balance there.
Yeah.
Kevin? Yeah, that brings up something, because there's a difference, it sounds like, with the platforms on how long the content stays, right? Because we've talked a lot about content that you're creating for consumption by others, but there's also is content that we can create that can be, you know, creation, that maybe we just want to produce something and put it somewhere. Because there's been a number of people who have done that, at least in the early days. And so I'm just kind of wondering, are there any, like, what's the lifespan? Like, I think I'm going to answer this question by asking the question, but what's the lifespan of content on the newer social media platforms as compared to some of the older ones? People may not consider YouTube a social media platform per se, but there's a social media aspect to it. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, if you're looking for like permanence to what you're creating rather than short form newspaper kind of ideas, which one would you gravitate to?
Yeah, well, first of all, I definitely consider YouTube a form of social media. And I would actually say, you know, on that note, that I think that that's probably the best platform for content, where content can stay. Or, I mean, if you want to consider a podcast social media as well, like that's also the type of place to put it, because it's searchable. People who are interested in those topics will be able to come across it as long as they can search for it. Whereas, you know, as you can imagine, on a platform like Twitter, where, you know, every day there are millions, if not billions, of tweets being put out there, it's, you know, there's no great way to, it's not curated in a way for each individual account where you can go back in time to search very easily. Even TikTok and Instagram, although they have like a grid there, scrolling back can be pretty difficult. And I don't know, I think that maybe in the future there might be new functionality introduced to these platforms, because I'm sure that they are well aware that this is like a limitation for them. But yeah, I think that that's one of the big reasons why YouTube is successful, is because you can search for the content on there.
And then again, not to take too much of your time, because as Melissa would say, we could probably talk to you for hours. You know, and that's what's fun about this is we get people like you on, and it's fun to just kind of talk to you and interrogate you and hear all the details. But we also were discussing quite a few things that I think for a physician that may be like a little bit of trepidation stepping into social media. Maybe they are either I can't say they're new to it, because younger generations have been born into it, but maybe they want to kind of move into it, or maybe their kids are pushing them to move into a platform. Who knows? And we said a lot of scary stuff, like who wants the anti-vaxxers to come after you? This is not to say you shouldn't say things that are science-based, but that's a pretty vicious crowd. And we're scared of these things, but why would there be a reason, or what reasons would you give to a physician to say, you know what, social media is someplace that rather than avoid, you may want to explore? What reasons would you give for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's so many reasons, and it, again, depends on which platform and what people's intentions are and purpose of being on social media is. So if someone wants to network and, remain kind of updated academically, I think that Twitter is a great platform for like professional networking and really getting to know other people who are key opinion leaders. I think at this point, that's where a lot of the key opinion leaders and thought leaders are. But if your goal is wanting to reach the general public, for instance, then that's probably not the right platform, in my opinion. And if your sole purpose is for education, or even to build your practice, or recruit for your program, or recruit patients to a trial or something like that, it can all be done on more patient-facing or public-facing platforms. I kind of alluded to the fact that you can stay updated to the news every day. When I think about whatever's happening around the corner, I don't really I don't wait for the evening news to report on it now anymore. I go straight to Twitter, because I know that chances are someone is talking about it on Twitter, rather than, wait for it on the evening news. And I think that, in the future, there's going to be, I think there's a growing awareness of the importance of social media for health messaging. And I think in the future, there's going to be a lot of opportunities, both entrepreneurial or even just collaboration wise with other people to get health messaging out there. And I think that, the people element of it is really important. So again, networking and building a community and meeting other people who you could potentially work with is really key.
Yeah. I love the collaboration aspect to it. The social media, let's not forget the social. That's
yeah. I mean, look, I wouldn't be here right now speaking to you if it wasn't for the fact that you found me on social media.
Exactly. And it wasn't stuffy and boring, and it drew my attention. And so sometimes you need a little, you don't have to be a serious, you don't have to make fun of something or, ruin your own reputation in the process, but you can add a little flair of personality and fun, so that people want to actually pay attention.
Yeah. And I think that, we, as a society, we already idolize celebrities and sports players. And I think that we need, not to say that we need celebrities in healthcare, because we certainly have people like that, but to have spokespeople for different areas of expertise and people who I think the public can grow to trust is really important. And it's difficult. We can see that, leading health experts right now are under fire, because I think that a lot of the time the general public doesn't quite understand how medicine isn't perfect and it's not infallible, and it's constantly changing, and we're learning more by the day. But the more of us out there talking about the fact that that's how medicine is, and this is how medicine works, I think it will help that process move along. And I certainly learn from people who are not in my field about their areas of expertise just by reading what they share on social media.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a really good point, that it's not that we want to be celebrities, but we want people to be able to relate to us and to trust us. But more importantly, we want them to start seeing the heart of medicine again. And I think if they they start seeing you for what this facade has been, and they recognize your true desire to help and to reach out and help. There's always going to be those outliers, but I think most people can see that when you're genuine and you're just trying to do something in a unique way to help people. And for a lot of people, it's free. They don't have to necessarily see something, even though it's not considered practicing medicine, just listening to basic education. But I like that idea of really getting people to see the hearts of what we do.
Yeah, I see that not only in our field, but with teachers on social media, with lawyers, with other folks, I think, who've been able to kind of do this in a fun way. It changes my opinion. I can only imagine, for, the younger generation, if they're looking at professors or teachers, I think hopefully it can kind of bridge the gap a little bit so that they don't feel like, they don't feel, so distant from some of these fields.
Yeah. Kevin?
I was going to say that sense of connection. And then the other aspect was just, as I was sitting here listening, is whether or not you choose to engage in social media, we all need to be aware that it's there, right? And in an ideal practice, it seems that social media should be an amplifier of your personality, and hopefully you have a good personality and you're a good person. I shouldn't say personality, a good person, right? But if you are not on social media, you still need to make sure that your standards are such, because there's a good chance someone's going to catch you and then they're going to amplify it. So we have lots of examples where bad behavior gets caught on social media, and stuff that for certainly 10 years ago and for sure 20 years ago, particularly in medicine, was much more common practice. You can't do those types of behaviors anymore. And I would also argue that's probably a good thing. But we should probably all be a little bit aware of social media, even if you don't think you're ever going to engage on a platform.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't think that I don't think not everybody wants to be on social media, and I get it. And I don't think that it's necessary either. I think we all have different personalities. We don't all want to be out there speaking to people all the time. And not that that's even my personality either. But I think that, some people want to stay private, and that's okay. But you're right that everyone in this profession, in this field, absolutely needs to be aware that people are talking, people are watching, and it's only going to become even more commonplace.
Yeah. Magnifying integrity is not necessarily a bad thing.
Not even on the individual level, but if you can imagine, like, on an institutional level too, I think that, our perception of people and of groups and of, institutions can also change based on what's being put out there. So, I think that social media can really alter people's perceptions of that.
Absolutely. Well, Kevin, any other questions for wrap us up?
No, other than love talking to you, and we should have you come back again to talk about specific platforms or
I'd love to.
Lots to talk about. And this is such an important topic because it is not going to go away. Right? The genie's open, the bottle's out. It's not going to go away. So the more we learn about it, the more we're in control. And as you've done, the way you can harness it to really kind of optimize your own clinical practice style, which is fantastic. So thank you very much for being on today.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, for those of you joining us on the Change Physician podcast, I'm Dr. Melissa Cady, joined by my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, with our lovely guest, Dr. Austin Chiang, with some amazing social media advice. We look forward to seeing him on a future episode. And until next time, we'll see you then.
Stay well, folks.